My name is Thomas. I'm 70 years old and have a memory that sometimes hurts more than it helps. But there is a day I'll never forget. It was on Christmas Eve when my own son looked me in the eye and said, "You're not family anymore." Can you imagine hearing this, fair to the person you created with your own hands? Have you ever felt that a lifetime of effort, of love, of presence? Can it be erased with a single sentence? Maybe you're also trying to understand where everything changed, because a child who was a hug and pride becomes someone who shuts the door in your face. If you've ever wondered how someone has the courage to despise those who have always been there, this video will show you more than one answer. It will show you what happens when a father's love is exchanged for greed, and what can be born from the silence of an old man who is tired of being ignored. By the end of this story, you won't just understand, you will feel it. Because sometimes justice comes without noise, but it never comes too late. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. I'm not one to talk much, I never was, but what I experienced that Christmas night was too big to keep to myself. Because when my son locked me out of his own house, with snow on his shoulders and the presents still in his hands, I understood that that phrase, "You are no longer family," was not just a breakup. It was a cut that crossed everything I built with him. And even so, I didn't fight back. I didn't hit, I didn't scream, I just got in the car and made a single call. What happened after that call changed the course of many lives at that table. If this story has touched you so far, if at any time you felt that this pain could be yours too, I wanted to ask you a favor from the heart. Leave your like on this video and subscribe here to the channel. This isn't just for me, it's for everyone who has been forgotten by those they created. Your support shows that stories like mine have not been in vain. We will go together until the end, because this story will still turn around. I remember well the smell in the air that night, that smell that the snow leaves when it covers everything, even the noise. It was cold, but it was a beautiful cold. One of those that make the streets look like a postcard. I drove carefully through the wide avenues of the hilltop, that neighborhood where it seems that even the sidewalk has pedigree. The houses were all decorated with programmed lights that flashed in harmony, as if they had rehearsed, one more beautiful than the other. And in the midst of so much elegance, there I was, with my old coat, the gifts packed by myself, and the cookies I prepared with the recipe that Margaret always made at Christmas. She said that the secret was to bake with a calm heart. I tried. I parked my car, my good old Honda that has seen more history than many of those German cars that were in front of Cody's house. There was a white Mercedes at the entrance, a black Lexus next to it, SUVs of people who don't care about light slips. His father-in-law's Bentley was also there, a silent warning that this night was big, and I looked too small in that scenario. I grabbed the bag of gifts, adjusted my tie in the rearview mirror, and went downstairs. I climbed the 3 steps of the entrance carefully, feeling every click of my left knee. His house. It was beautiful, yes. Light stone facade, automatic curtains, heater on the floor, everything I never had, but which I helped to pay indirectly with years and years of sacrifice. I rang the bell, once, twice, 3, took. I heard voices inside, laughter, background music, a faint smell of roasting in the air. Waited. When the door opened, I was not greeted with smiles, not even with a hug. I was greeted with an icy look. Bethany, his wife, appeared first. She wore an expensive dress, impeccable makeup, and that way of hers that seems to be always on trial, as if everything around her was an underwhelming note. He looked me up and down and said, with a smile too polite to be honest, "Ah, you have come." Before I could answer, Cody came up behind her, and my son's face. It wasn't the face I knew. I was tense, uncomfortable, as if my presence had disturbed something. "Dad, you arrived unannounced again." I didn't understand. "But son, it's Christmas." He forced a smile, took the gifts from my hands without inviting me in, and said, "We have a full house today. Just a more reserved dinner, you know." I took a deep breath. I saw inside a table set for at least 12 people. Lined cutlery, expensive wine, porcelain plates. I saw people I had never seen. Bethany's friends, perhaps, colleagues of the father-in-law. I looked at my son, and at that moment I realized that the distance between us was not meters. It was years old. I tried to joke. "I made the cookies that your mother made, the ones you ate in secret." He took the package in a hurry and said, "Ah, cool, Dad, thank you." And she turned to Bethany, whispering something that made me feel even more invisible. "No, there is a moment when we realize that we are no longer invited. It was only tolerated out of politeness. Allow me a moment, because maybe you've felt that too. Being in a place where, despite everything you've done, it seems like they don't want you there anymore. As if you had beaten time, but lost the space. If you've ever felt something similar, comment below with a simple, "I've lived it," or "It touched me." Sometimes sharing is all we have to keep from collapsing inside. Back at that door, Bethany suggested, "Maybe you can stop by at another time. Today everything will be very full." I swallowed hard, still with the jacket closed, with the snow piling up on the hood of my car. "I see." That was all I could say. I turned around, and before I walked down the steps I heard Cody say, in that voice that was no longer my boy's, "Dad, sometimes you exaggerate. He shows up without arranging, wants to talk when we're busy. Life changes." At that moment it was as if time had stopped. I looked back at my own son and saw in him something I never imagined I would see, shame of me. I felt my shoulders slump, but my feet remained firm to the car, entered. I closed the door. The world outside was still cold, but inside something was even colder. It was then that I picked up my cell phone. I looked at that contact that I kept as if keeping a last match on a dark night. Peter Mills, my son's father-in-law. A man who, a while ago, had given me a card and said, "Anything, Mr. Thomas, call me." At that moment, I called. But you know what's more curious? It wasn't what I said in that call that changed everything. That's what he answered. And believe me, you still don't know half of what that night has become. Do you want to know what Peter said to me when he answered? So stay here with me, because it is now that history begins to turn. When Peter answered, his voice came in firm but gentle, like someone who has lived long enough and knows when something is wrong. "Mr. Thomas, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" I was silent for a few seconds. The noise of the party still echoed outside the car. Bethany's muffled laughter, the clinking of glasses, the ambient music hand-picked to impress. "Peter," I said, "sorry to call at that time. It's Christmas Eve. But I think you need to know what's going on in this house." On the other end of the line, he fell silent. I waited for some sign. Of course, you can talk. But he didn't have to. His silence gave me space. I told him what I had experienced in the last few minutes. From the door opened coldly, to Cody's comment saying that I showed up unannounced. I told him that I saw my empty seat at the table, while the fine plates waited for other people. They knew I was coming, Peter. Knew. They just didn't want me to be part of it. Peter let out a sigh. "Keep going," he said. And then, in a firm but low voice, I told him of the moment when I tried to sit near the table. A corner, a loose chair. I thought maybe, even if I hadn't been invited with enthusiasm, there was still room for me. Bethany saw me going there and gave me that look of someone who knows you no longer belong in the environment. Cody followed behind, plate in hand. He said in a low voice, but clearly enough, "Dad, this is not for you. You're no longer part of it here. Go away." I froze. Peter too. He was slow to respond, but I kept going. I asked, "But it's Christmas, son." And he replied, "Get out before you embarrass us." It hurt to tell it, but it hurt even more to remember. The way he said it, as if I were a nuisance, a stain on his new world. When I realized it, the front door was already closed. I was not escorted to the exit. I was not accompanied to the car, only outcast, like someone who pushes an old box to the basement. Peter was slow to answer, and when he answered it was only with 3 words. I understand. Thank you. Turned off. I stayed there in the stopped car, my icy fingers squeezing the steering wheel, the cookies in the passenger seat, those present on the floor, the eyes dry, because I had such an emptiness inside me that not even a tear could escape. I stood there for more than 10 minutes, without the courage to start the engine, just listening in the distance to the sounds of that house that was once my reference for the future, and now it was just a beautiful building where I was no longer welcome. The snow kept falling, slowly, as if heaven had pity. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the reflection of my own expression, a tired gentleman, shoulders slumped, crooked tie, and a look that asked, where did I go wrong? No, I gave so much for that boy, so much. I slept little, worked a lot. I never missed it. I never hid. I was present when his mother left, when he graduated, when he cried for the first disappointment. And now I was just an inconvenient detail. I wondered there, in the silence of the car, if other parents had ever gone through this, if there is any way to prepare for this type of cut. Because it's not just a door closing, it's a timeline being interrupted, as if everything that has been built was erased with a sentence. I took a deep breath. I started the engine. Exhaust fumes rose, mixing with the cold night air. But before leaving, I looked once more at that illuminated house. I saw shadows laughing behind the curtain, and I promised myself this was not the end. That silent humiliation, that coldness, all that needed to have a weight, and not only in my memory, because what happened after that locked door, none of them ever imagined. Want to know what I found out when I got home that same night? Because history, it only started to really hurt when I noticed a detail that no one expected. When I got home that night, the silence greeted me like an old friend. The porch light still on, swaying in the wind. Snow had started to accumulate on the front steps, and for a moment I thought I'd just go inside, put the kettle on the fire, and try to forget about it. But something inside me wouldn't let me. It was a different restlessness. It was not sadness. It was something deeper, something that was born when pain turns into lucidity. I entered slowly, hung up my coat, left the gifts in the armchair in the living room, and I went straight to my tool drawer, where I keep some personal things as well. Between screwdrivers and old batteries, I found that card I kept years ago. Peter Mills, CEO, Mills Real Estate Group. I remembered the day he gave me that piece of paper. It had been at a housewarming party for a building that, ironically, I had helped build, a project by Peter himself. He had called me a real man when he learned that I had worked for 36 years at the same construction company without taking a day off out of laziness. Anything, Mr. Thomas, call me. I kept it like someone who keeps a match on a cold night. And there I was, match in hand, inside my icy house, my heart colder than the air outside. I picked up the phone. I sat at the table. I dialed the number. And even before calling for the 3rd time, he answered. Peter Mills. His voice was confident, even though he didn't know who was on the other side. Mr. Mills, it's Thomas, Cody's dad. There was a short pause. He recognized me immediately. Mr. Thomas, what a surprise. Is everything okay? I took a deep breath. I think you need to know something. And then I counted. But not only what happened that night. I told him what I had heard 2 days earlier, unintentionally, when I went to Cody's house to bring some of Margaret's insurance documents he had requested. They were in the office and didn't see me coming. I heard Bethany say, he's perfect for this. A retired worker, widower, with no notion of his own place. It will be the ideal contrast to show your father-in-law how much you have grown. And Cody replied, laughing, yes, the perfect before for my success story. I froze at the door. I pretended I didn't hear. I handed in the papers. Smile. I left. But that stayed with me. I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe it was just a joke, that maybe they were nervous, wanting to assert themselves. But that night, when they kicked me out of supper, it all made sense. They didn't want to exclude me for nothing. They wanted to use me, show off, like a dirty mirror where they shine brighter. Peter didn't say anything for long seconds. On the other end of the line, I could only hear his breathing, until in a low voice he said, "Thank you for telling me. Maybe this Christmas dinner will surprise more people than they expect." That was it. Turn off. I stood there with the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. I knew something had moved, that for the first time I was not alone in that pain. But he still had no idea what Peter intended to do. I only knew that he had power, and that maybe, just maybe, was on my side. And it was there, at that same table where Margaret and I had dined in silence so many times, that I began to realize perhaps justice does not need shouting. Maybe sometimes she just needs an old silence and a certain ally. But what did Peter do after that call? Not even in my wildest dreams could I have imagined. Do you want to know what happens when the mask falls in front of everyone? Because the supper had not yet begun, and the main course, it was the truth. The road home seemed longer that night. The car radio was off, just the sound of the tires cutting through the snow, and the sound of my own heart beating slower than usual. As I drove through the empty streets of Denver, lit by the yellowed streetlights and Christmas lights of happy homes, my mind drifted away. It went backwards, far behind. I went back to the nights when Cody was just a skinny boy, with scraped knees and big eyes that sparkled when he saw me come home from work. I remember the smell of dry concrete mixed with sweat and the pain in my hands, which sometimes bled under their gloves, but still pressed the camera tight to record his recital at school. I was really tired, even with a fever, even with wet boots from the rain. He looked at me on stage and made that gesture of timid nod, as if to say, "I saw that you came." There was a special Saturday. He must have been about 8 years old. His bike broke down in the middle of the street. I was fixing the back fence of the house, but I dropped everything right away. I spent the whole morning with my knee on the ground, trying to get the brake to work again. At the end, he pedaled off the sidewalk, laughing and shouting, "You're the best dad in the world." I believed it. I believed so much that years later, when he said he wanted to go to college out of state, I went to the bank, renegotiated debts, sold my expensive tools, even did odd jobs on private work. Everything for him to study. I filled out the forms with a blue ballpoint pen, not understanding half of what was written, but understanding all that it meant to him. And it worked. He went in. He graduated. And I became poorer, but happy. He was my pride. It was the promise that all that effort would have been worth it. But time passed, and that boy who hugged me tight when I arrived with the smell of cement. He has become a man who locks the door when he sees me with a bottle of cheap wine in his hand. I remember once, right after he married Bethany, he introduced me to a business dinner saying, "This is my dad, worker, the kind who does everything with his own hands." And he laughed as if making a joke, and then he added, "Peter has an empire, my father has an old truck." They laughed along with him. I laughed too, but inside something cracked. You know, I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. If you're still listening to me, I wanted to ask just one thing. Leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not out of vanity, no. It's because there are a lot of people like me who lived for the family and ended up forgotten. And if this story touches anyone, it was worth telling. What hurts me the most is not that I was left outside that night. It's remembering how much I've been on the inside my whole life. And even so, I turned the contrast, the before in his discourse of overcoming. But life is made of cycles, right? And sometimes, who was used as a ladder, it ends up becoming the step where the other stumbles. Do you want to know what Peter did with everything he heard from me? Because look, he's not the type to forget quickly, and what he did at that supper, No one expected it. When I parked the car in front of my house, the first thing I noticed was the mailbox. It was crooked, half torn off, with the lid drooping and some cards soaked by the snow. One of them had footmarks on top, as if someone had stepped on it on purpose. It was not the first time. The neighborhood has changed a lot in recent years. New, different people who don't know history, don't look you in the eye, don't ask if you need help when they see you carrying heavy bags. I picked up the cards with my hands already hardened by the cold and looked at the floor. Footprints. 2 different trails going back and forth from the gate. And then a silly thought came to me. Could it be that even my own house was wanting to kick me out? I went in, closed the door slowly and didn't turn on the light in the room, only the one in the corner of the kitchen. The house was colder inside than outside. I took off my coat, hung it on the same hanger where Margaret hung hers. It had been 8 years since she had left, and yet everything about her seemed to be in here. I put the kettle on the fire and sat down. The clock on the wall made that ticking that on normal days I didn't even notice. But that night, he seemed to scream inside my head. I walked down the hallway. I ran my hand over the frame of our wedding photo. The 2 of us were young, full of fear and hope. Then another photo with the small Cody on his lap, and another on the day he graduated. Me with the crooked shirt and the most certain smile in the world. I sat in the armchair in the living room, with a mug of weak coffee in my hands. The silence was so thick that I could hear the water heating up in the heater pipe. I remembered a night long ago when Margaret was worried about the bills and the future. We had lost a friend, and she told me, in the serene voice of someone who knew things, "The world is going to turn, Tom. Just don't let him take you out of the center." That echoed in me as if she were right next door. But I wondered, what if the center had collapsed? If even the basis of what I thought was unshakable, the love of a child, could disappear like this? The mug cooled in my hand. I stood there, staring into the void, listening to the crackling of the old wood of the house. It wasn't just the wood that creaked, it was the time, too. I thought about everything I had faced in life. Loss, illness, poverty, tiredness, sleepless nights, days without lunch. But nothing hurt like that absence. Because we even understand the absence of the world. Now the absence of who you created. This one breaks you from the inside out. I got up, walked to the front window and stood there, looking at the empty street. A car passed in the distance, dragging the snow. No neighbors on the sidewalks, no children playing, just me and my house. And I thought, is this what awaits all of us in the end? A cold armchair, a tight silence. A past that doesn't come back and a present that no longer recognizes you. That's when I heard the noise of my phone, vibrating. I took it slowly, already discouraged. A number I didn't know. Answered. The voice on the other end was deep, paused, like someone carrying something important. "Mr. Thomas, good night, this is Mr. Peter Mills." His heart beat faster. "I've been thinking about what you told me, and I decided to accept his invitation." "Invitation?" I asked, confused. "Yes. Invite me to see the truth, and you succeeded. Only now I want more people to see it too." Before I could ask him what he meant by that, he continued, "Wait for me tomorrow. We have a supper to visit." Hung up. I stood there with the phone still in my hand, the house in silence, and a question hammering in my head. What did Peter Mills intend to do with that supper that had already become an open wound? The next day, the morning grew grayer than usual. The snow still covered everything, but it no longer had that beautiful glow of the day before. It was a heavy, worn layer, trampled by the cars and lies of the night before. I passed a strong coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stood there, looking out the window without seeing anything. Peter's call was still hammering in my head. "We have a supper to visit," he said. But what did that mean exactly? I didn't know. I just knew that there was a different tone in his voice. A tone of someone who not only listened, but felt. The phone rang again around 10 in the morning. I looked at the number on the screen, and my chest tightened. Cody answered. His voice came soft, tidy, almost too gentle. "Dad, I wanted to apologize to you for last night. I think He exaggerated a little. It was all very last minute, you know." I was silent. I let him talk. "Bethany also apologized. We want you to come to dinner tonight. The officer, with the complete family." "Complete family," I repeated more to myself than to him. That voice of his was not my son's. It was that of a trained manager. Every word seemed to have gone through rehearsal. "It will be at 7. Let's prepare your favorite dish. And we really want you to be there." I was silent for a few seconds. "That's right, son. I'm going." The answer came out without emotion. "Great. We will be happy with your presence." It took him a while to turn it off, and that's when it happened. He thought he had ended the call, but the phone was still open. I heard the laughter, a dry, mocking laugh. Then Bethany's voice, "Does he really believe we're going to receive him?" And Cody added, laughing softly, "Peter will see the perfect contrast between a real businessman and an old factory worker with a small mind." It was as if someone had squeezed my chest with both hands. I stood there, with the phone still against my ear, listening to them laugh at me. Every word of them went down my spine like ice, and there, at that moment, I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I felt sorry. Sorry for them for thinking that was victory, because they believed that ridiculing the person who gave you the first course of food made someone an example of success. No, I wanted you to listen to this until the end, because what's about to happen in a little while, in that same house where they humiliated me, will turn everything upside down. And no, it's not revenge. It's something bigger. I got up from my chair. I washed the mug. I dried it with the tea towel that Margaret embroidered on her first Christmas as a wife. I looked at her photo on top of the fridge. She was smiling, and even though I knew it was just an image, seemed to say to me, "Now you get it." Yes, now I understood. The invitation was not to redeem me. It was supposed to use me. Again. But what they didn't know, I was no longer the same man who had left that door the day before. Peter wasn't the same either. And that night, it wasn't just me who would return to that house. Do you want to know who else was coming with me? Because when the truth enters without knocking, not even luxury curtains can hide it. I went back to my room and opened the closet calmly. There, hanging in a corner that I almost never touched, was the dark blue suit, the same one I wore to Margaret's funeral. It smelled of time, of memory. I ran my hand over the fabric and felt like I touched her shoulder. I dressed slowly, as someone who wears not only an outfit, but an entire memory. I adjusted the tie she taught me to knot and looked in the mirror. The eyes were deeper, the shoulders more hunched, but inside, something was firm. I picked up the phone and called Peter. He answered immediately. "Confirmed," I said. "Tonight they're going to try to destroy me in front of their guests." He took a deep breath on the other end of the line. "So let's do it the right way." I hung up and started to tidy up my house. Every corner, every detail. I took out of the closet the porcelain set that Margaret inherited from her mother. She said it was for special dates. I had never used it again since she left. I dusted with a clean cloth, positioned the dishes on the embroidered tablecloth. I opened the freezer. There it was, the turkey I had bought weeks before, still believing that I would have a family Christmas. While the oven was preheating, I put on some soft music. The house took on another smell, another tone. I wasn't preparing just any supper. I was preparing an altar of dignity. Each cutlery on the table was a gesture of respect to myself. Each folded napkin, a reminder that I still existed, that I still knew how to care, receive, welcome. And as I greased the tray, I remembered a phrase that Margaret said every time sadness wanted to live in our living room. "We can't control what the world takes from us, but you can choose what we won't let them take." I chose not to let them take my memory, my decency, my value. No, there are moments in life when we stop asking for space from others and start building our own. It's a quiet but powerful change. Let me ask you something now. Have you ever felt that too? that desire to simply rescue what is left of you after being erased, ignored, left for later. If you've ever felt this, comment here with an "I understand you" or a "I know how it is," because sometimes sharing the feeling with those who have lived the same thing is half the cure. I went back to the living room and sat down for a moment just to look at what I had done. It was simple, but it was honest. It was mine. And that night, no look of contempt, no rehearsed phrase, no fake smile could erase what that supper meant. Peter sent me a short message. In 30 minutes, everything changes. I looked at the clock. I adjusted the cuffs of my shirt, and I walked to the window. The street was calm. The snow was beginning to fall again, but inside, in that house where so much pain accumulated in silence, something was about to happen. Do you want to know what happens when a simple man decides not to shut up anymore? Because now, my friend, now is when the main course of the night will be served. Driving to the hilltop that night was like crossing a border that I already knew well, but now had different eyes. The neighborhood seemed even brighter than the day before. Each house was a postcard. Entrance doors with expensive garlands, windows with perfectly symmetrical electric candles, gardens covered with lights that flashed to the rhythm of imported Christmas songs. And there, in the middle of it all, my old blue pickup truck squeaked across the asphalt like an intruder. I parked in front of Cody's house, where 3 SUVs glowed in the driveway. Black, chrome, modern. The contrast was stark, and for some reason, I didn't feel any smaller. I felt true. I got out of the car in the same dark blue suit I wore to say goodbye to Margaret. I took a deep breath. The air was cold, dry, but my steps were steady. There was no doubt in me anymore, just a kind of powerful silence, like that of someone who has seen the storm coming and decides not to run. The doorbell sounded like a start warning. The door opened quickly. Bethany, in a silver dress and a glass of champagne in her hand, looked at me with that smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Why, Daddy has arrived," she said aloud, as if announcing an attraction. Some of the guests made polite waves. One of them I recognized, Mr. Walter Briggs, one of the investors in the Mills Group. Cody emerged close behind, his Rolex gleaming under the candlelight arranged on the entrance table. He came up to me, patted me 2 quick pats on the shoulder, no hug, and said, "I'm glad you came, Dad. Please come in." The floor of the house looked even brighter. The walls decorated with new paintings, all smelling like expensive stuff. The ambient music was instrumental jazz, and the smell of the food seemed to come out of a 5-star restaurant. I was slowly entering, watching every detail. I knew Peter was there, and it didn't take long to see him. He was by the fireplace, talking to a well-dressed lady, perhaps his wife. When he saw me, he just raised his glass as a sign of respect, a discreet gesture, but full of meaning. Bethany guided me to a chair near the end of the table. It was not prominence nor isolation. It was calculated positioning. Close enough for me to be seen, but too far away for my presence to be welcomed. Cody made a small toast, thanked everyone for their presence, talked about the year's achievements and the importance of family. The word family came out of his mouth as if it were a prize, a business achievement. And I was there, quiet, just watching. No, sometimes the greatest strength lies in saying nothing, in just being. They thought they had control of that night, that they would repeat the same play with the same roles, but they forgot that I am from the time when the foundation of a building was more important than its facade, and that night, the foundation of their lie would begin to crack. Peter raised his glass and asked for the floor. Can you imagine what he said there in front of everyone? Because what came next? No one in that room was prepared to listen. The dining room was worthy of a search. Plates with golden fillets, linen napkins folded like origami, glasses so thin that they seemed to sing to the touch. The long table was surrounded by chairs upholstered in grey velvet, and in the background, a modern candlestick cast soft shadows on the marble wall. All calculated, everything made to impress. And in the center of that stage, I was the piece of contrast. Bethany opened a wide smile, one of those that show all their teeth but hide all their feelings, and pulled me lightly by the arm to the middle of the room. In a firm and sweet voice, he said, "This is Mr. Thomas, Cody's father. A great example of effort. Hard working, you know, a worker all his life. He built his own life with his hands. Literally." Some guests smiled. Others made that polite sound that mimics laughter. I just clasped my hands together, keeping my body straight. And then she turned to one of her friends, without even lowering her tone. "Peter will notice the contrast." I turned around discreetly and saw Peter watching from afar, showing no reaction, only the attentive eyes. Cody approached and completed the scene, gently tapping me on the back. Without him, I wouldn't have gotten to where I am. My father is, how can I say, the humble origin of our history. More smiles, more giggles. They were putting on a role play. Each line was a script. Every word, a pin. Me, silent. One of the ladies, trying to be nice, asked what was the most important work I built. I replied, "The public school gym over there in Montview. It took me 3 winters on that project." Before I could finish telling you how I managed to make the roof withstand the snowstorms, Cody interrupted with a muffled laugh. "Leave it, Dad. That's not really your thing here." The phrase fell like a stone in my throat. Their gazes wavered for a second. 1 or 2 guests seemed annoyed, but soon they followed the flow of the night. Low giggles, cups raised, side conversations. I stayed there, standing. My heart hurt, but my face was calm. I was a single man, but he was not alone. Peter knew. I knew it. And now, others were also beginning to notice. At that time, looking around, seeing so many important people, so much posing and so much vanity, I just thought about how my Margaret would hate it. She always told me, the true luxury is to be treated with respect. And there, on that table full of gold and silver, that was just what was missing. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. The humiliation was not in their words. It was in the tone, in intention, in the wickedness that disguises itself as elegance. But I held on, because I knew that night wasn't over yet. And what comes after a pretend theater? It's the curtain falling. Can you imagine what happens when the truth decides to sit at the table as well? Because, my friend, her chair was reserved, and it was time to use it. Peter stood up slowly. He didn't have to knock a glass or ask for silence. His authority filled the room effortlessly. The conversation died down little by little, like a wind that loses its strength before the rain falls. Everyone turned to him, smiling, especially Cody and Bethany. They were sure that praise would come, perhaps some promise of investment, a public recognition of their rise. I, sitting in a corner of the table, just watched. Peter's gaze passed by everyone. When it landed on me, there was no pity, there was respect. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice firm. "Before we close this evening, I would like to propose a toast." The glasses rose automatically. The rehearsed gesture of the elite. But his words did not follow the script. Today, in this house, I relearned a lesson that life is trying to teach all too often. The true value of those who build with their own hands. Some guests frowned. Cody chuckled nervously. Bethany sat back in her chair, still with her smile glued to her face like a mask. Peter continued, "There are those who have fortune, and there are those who have character. And when they try to use the first to ridicule the second, something breaks, something inside the soul." The silence became thicker. I heard, with my own ears, how a lifetime's effort can be used as a tool of humiliation, how a father can be demoted to the role of extra so that his son shines in front of others. And I tell you, he raised his glass slowly, there is no greater success than quiet decency. The one that doesn't need to be shown because it stands on its own. Cody's hands began to shake. Bethany lowered her eyes. The smiles around her disappeared. Peter looked around and said, with the same calmness as a judge reading the sentence, "Therefore tonight I choose not to toast with lies. I choose to dine elsewhere, with those who taught me what true greatness is." He left the glass on the table gently, not a tinkling, just the dry sound of something that closes. Then he turned around. No one moved. He walked to the door as if he were the master of the house. And in a way, that night it was. You know, there are moments in life when a single sentence spoken in the right tone dismantles entire vanity castles. And if you think that was the pinnacle, wait just to see what happened after Peter walked through that door, because dinner was just beginning. The silence that remained after Peter crossed the door was louder than any music that played in that house. No one knew whether to breathe or wait for the next act. The cutlery remained motionless on the plates. The cups, suspended in the air, lost their meaning. I continued to sit, watching, unhurried. I had seen a lot in life, but never a dinner turned into judgment without the need for a loud voice or a raised finger. The first to stand up was Mr. Briggs. He adjusted his jacket, wiped his glasses with a pocket square, and said, almost in a whisper, "I'm sorry, Cody, but I have just reminded you that I have another commitment." Without waiting for an answer, he walked to the exit. Right behind came his wife, then a young couple who didn't even look me in the eye. A man with a British accent muttered to his wife, "That was uncomfortable." And he did. In less than 10 minutes, the room was deflated like a punctured balloon. What was once a parade of tinkling glasses was now a graveyard of pristine porcelain and embarrassed looks. Cody, standing in the middle of the room, tried to put together the crumbs of dignity with explanations that no one wanted to hear. "Guys, it was just a misunderstanding. Peter got it wrong." But what he didn't understand is that respect, when broken, makes a noise that echoes inside people. Bethany, with her eyes wide and her makeup starting to run, tried to approach me. "Dad, that's not what you're thinking, please." I just looked at her, a dry look, not of anger, but of end. No, there are memories that stick to us like the smell of coffee on a rainy morning. They go through years. That moment was one of those. Their mansion, with all its pomp and pride, was now just too big a place for two small hearts. If you've ever experienced something that became a memory overnight, if you've ever seen emptiness take over a place full of pose, write here in the comments. Tell me. Sometimes sharing these memories is like opening a window where before there was only a wall. Outside, the wind was blowing firmly. Peter was already standing next to my car, the old blue Honda Civic that I still kept clean, even with rust taking over some edges. He saw me leaving the house and waved with a faint smile. He opened the passenger door and entered unceremoniously. Behind me, the lights of the mansion were still on, but now they lit up only what was left: cold dishes, half-finished wine, and two hosts staring at each other as if they had woken up from a dream too late. The scene was clear. Peter Mills, the tycoon, sitting in the seat of my old car, and the guests, one by one, following in their footsteps, refusing the false glow to stay with the simple truth. It's curious how fast the world turns. One night is enough for everything to get out of control, but what do you think happened when Peter and I sat at that table set in my simple home? Because what he said there, it still echoes inside me, like the most beautiful speech I have ever heard. Driving back to my house that night was different. The car seemed lighter, even carrying the weight of so many looks. Peter was next to me silently, watching the snow-covered streets with that calm manner of someone who thinks more than he talks. Behind us came 2, 3, then 5 cars of the guests who had left the mansion. None of them honked. No one tried to overtake. They came at the same pace as me, as if they understood that that route was not just physical, it was symbolic. When I parked, I got off first. I adjusted my jacket and opened the gate with a simple gesture, as I always did. The wooden porch crackled under my feet, and the yellow light of the room escaped through the cracks in the curtain. I turned the key, opened the door, and said, in the most natural way possible, "Come in. The house is humble, but the heart is wide." Peter entered first. He stopped in the living room, looked around, and for the first time in the night, he really smiled. "It smells like life here," he said. I went to the kitchen, grabbed the still hot kettle from the stove, and brewed fresh coffee. Meanwhile, the other guests arrived little by little. They took off their coats, hung them behind the chairs in the dining room. No ostentation, no title. There everyone was just people. I opened the oven, carefully removed the roasted turkey, and brought it to the table. It was golden, juicy, just the way Margaret liked it. I placed them next to the platters with rice, farofa, and potatoes that I had calmly prepared that afternoon. I took the porcelain plates out of the living room cabinet, that old game she said to use only in special moments. Well, that moment was one of them. The conversation started low, but soon spread like good perfume. One of the businessmen, Mr. Briggs, looked at a photograph of Margaret on the shelf and asked, "Was that your wife?" I said yes. He stared at her for a while and then remarked, "She looks like someone who knew exactly who she was." Peter took a sip of his coffee and blurted out, "You know, Thomas, this supper has more value than any buffet I've ever been to. Here the food feeds, but what really fills us is the silence with respect, the clean look, the smell of wood and memories. The table has become a place of confessions." One of them said he hadn't seen his father for years. Another recalled when his grandfather made bread on wood on Sundays. One lady spoke of the handwritten letters she received as a child. Nobody there was concerned with curriculum, investments, appearance. They were worried about what they had lost along the way, and I was there listening, serving coffee, cutting slices of turkey. I felt whole, not because they were all looking at me, but because somehow I had become a mirror. This was the Christmas Margaret would dream of having. One of the men, after filling his plate for the second time, blurted out, "Today I learned what Christmas really is." I looked at the table, at the simple candles that flickered, at the sincere laughter that was born effortlessly, and thought, sometimes all the world needs is a house that still knows how to listen. Can you believe that even that old kitchen radio, which never tuned properly, decided to play an old song softly, as if he also knew that the night had changed its tone? But let me tell you, while all this was happening inside my house, something outside was still waiting for me, because the silence of Cody's mansion, it hadn't broken yet, and someone in that empty house about to collapse. I would do something I never imagined. After supper, later in the day, the conversation slowed down like a fire that calms down but still warms up. Most of the guests were in the room, sitting in the worn armchairs, with their coats folded in their laps, talking softly. The light from the lampshade reflected on the wall of the room like a living shadow. Peter still held his cup of coffee and looked around with that thoughtful way of someone who sees beyond what the eyes show. That's when Mr. Briggs, the same one who left Cody's house first, cleared his throat and said, looking straight at me, "You know, Thomas, Cody lost the most wealth he had." The phrase was loose in the air for a few seconds. No one rushed the next comment. It was as if everyone there needed to breathe before continuing. The woman next to him, Mrs. Marjorie, added in a low, almost emotional voice, "If my father were still alive, I would like him to be like you." The words hit me deeply, but they didn't hurt. On the contrary, they were like a hand on the shoulder, one of those that we feel even after the person leaves. Peter, who had been silent until then, looked at me with a firmness I had never seen before. "As of today," he said, "any partnership with Cody is over. I don't do business with people who don't respect their roots. And as for Bethany, well, she will need to review the concepts she has about legacy, because money without gratitude becomes a burden." The others in silence nodded. He didn't need anything else. No screaming, no punishment. Only the truth being placed at the center of the table, and I was there, quiet, listening to everything. I didn't say thank you, nor did I cry. I just looked at my cup and felt that, for the first time in many years, I was where I should be, You know, there are moments that don't need a response, because the facts, they speak louder than any defense. And as much as that night ended in peace, the next day still had an unexpected encounter in store for me, because someone had the courage to look for me. But was it regret or fear of being left with nothing? The dawn had barely turned, and I was already cleaning the dishes slowly, the way Margaret did. Warm water, cotton cloth, and care. The house still smelled of coffee and good conversation. Peter said goodbye with a firm hug, and the others left little by little, thanking them one by one, as if leaving a temple. The night, despite everything, was beautiful. But it was barely dawn, and the noise of the doorbell cut through the silence like a knife in glass. I went to the door, unhurriedly. When I opened it, I saw it there. My son, Cody, without a coat, with red eyes, hunched shoulders, his shirt tucked halfway through his pants, as if he had left in a hurry. He was different. I was no longer that perky man who sent me away on Christmas Eve. He was a lost boy. "Dad, what did you do?" His voice came out trembling, more from despair than cold. He looked inside the house, trying to see something. "Peter doesn't answer me. The contracts disappeared. The calls stopped. You destroyed my life." I stared at him for a while, enough time not to say anything thoughtless. I only watched him there, with my eyes looking for an explanation where there was only consequence. And then, with the calmness that time teaches, I replied, "I didn't destroy anything, Cody. I just showed you who you are. The rest, you did it yourself." "Ooh!" He closed his eyes as if my sentence had hit harder than any scream. He tried to take a step inside, but before I could say anything, Peter, who was still there in the living room finishing tying his scarf, stood up. He came to the door, stood next to me, looked Cody up and down and said, with a firmness that left no room for rebuttal, "You're not welcome here today, Cody." My son froze, literally and inside. He stood motionless for a few seconds until a shrill voice cut through the air. "Is that right?" It was Bethany. She got out of the car in a hurry, stepping on the snow as if the ground was not worthy of her. "Did you choose this old man over your family?" Peter didn't even change. He just turned his face to her and said, in a tone that chilled to the soul, "I chose character." And without saying another word, he closed the door. I stood there for a few seconds. I heard footsteps retreating, tires skidding in the snow. No word of apology, no request for forgiveness. Only the sound of the haste of those who no longer know what to do with their own emptiness. No, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. If this story is touching you in any way, like this video and subscribe. Will it reach those who need to listen but don't think it's over? Because after all this, I still had to make a choice. And this choice, it was not easy. Want to know what I decided? Just wait for what comes next. The next day, I was sitting on the porch, sipping my thin black coffee as I've always liked, when the phone rang. It was still early and I hardly answer calls in the morning, but something made me get up and go to him. On the other end of the line, a calm, professional voice. "Mr. Thomas, this is Dr. Levinson, Mr. Peter Mill's lawyer. He asked me to call in person." I took a deep breath. Whenever someone says they are going to speak in person, I already know that something big is coming. And it did. I would like to inform you that you have been officially included as an honorary advisor to the Mills Foundation for Popular Housing. It is a direct decision of Mr. Peter. I kept quiet. It was a lot of things at once. Me, counselor. So I, who only learned to sign my name properly after 40, who grew up mixing cement and counting coins to pay for dinner. But the lawyer did not stop there. Part of the assets previously reserved for family inheritance will be redirected to social actions. In your name, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Peter believes that you represent values that need to be eternalized. I closed my eyes. For a second I saw Margaret smiling at the front gate, her apron stained with flour, saying, "You've always given more than you got, Tom. One day the world will see it." And he did. I went to the bedroom, took out the envelope where I kept her photo, the one from when we were still dating, and put it on the living room table. I picked up the phone back and said, "I can't accept salary. I never did good expecting a return, but I can help with ideas, with what I have experienced, with what I learned by hitting slabs and raising children alone. I only ask for one thing, that my wife's name be in these projects. She always wanted to help other families." And on the other side, silence. Then the lawyer said in a lower voice, "Let's take care of it, Mr. Thomas. I promise." The news spread faster than I imagined. At the end of the week, I was invited to participate in an informal meeting with directors of the foundation. I got there with my flannel shirt, my notebook, and a clean face. When I entered the room, I saw my name written on a whiteboard. Ethics and Dignity Reference, Thomas Weaver. I didn't cry, but it was close. There, sitting with men in suits and women who spoke 3 languages, I told stories of people who build with their hands, of children who sleep hearing leaks, and of women who work miracles with little. They listened, noted, applauded, and for the first time in my life, I felt big, not for the title, but because I understood that my story, even simple, could raise other houses, heal other pains, prevent other children from despising their parents. You know, sometimes the world puts you aside thinking you've given everything you can, but when you least expect it, he comes back and asks you to show again how it's done. If you're watching this far, stay with me, because there is one last twist that no one imagined. Not even me. You'll want to hear what happened at the end of this story. It's chilling. The days that came after that Christmas were not like the others. Not because of gifts or parties, but because of the different silence that came to live in my house. It was a light, serene silence, as if someone had cleaned the pain from the corners of the room and left only what was essential, peace. That same week, on Thursday, they knocked on my door early in the morning. It was Mr. Elmer, my neighbor on the corner. He had his granddaughter by the hand, a red-haired, freckled, bright-eyed little girl. "She wanted to meet you, Thomas. I told you what you did. She thought you were a hero." I was speechless. I bent down, looked into the girl's eyes and asked, "And what did you think of my Christmas turkey?" She laughed and said, "I wanted one just like it for my birthday." After that, the door of my house seems to have come to life. Other neighbors came, people I only saw at a glance, people who had never greeted me. Some brought bread, others coffee. Some just came to say thank you. You reminded us of what matters. A local journalist, one of those who writes about events in the city, called me and asked to come and interview me. I resisted at first. I didn't want to make news, but she insisted in such a respectful way that I ended up accepting. She spent the afternoon with me, sitting on the sofa in the living room, drinking tea and asking about everything. Margaret, little Cody, concrete work, Christmas Eve. When she finished, she thanked me with moist eyes. Days later, the article came out. Christmas on Maple Street, where character won over capital. It didn't take long for letters to arrive. Many, some handwritten in crooked handwriting, others in small computer print. They came from places I didn't even know how to pronounce properly. One of them read, "Mr. Thomas, I never knew my father, but you gave me an idea of what he could have been." Another, "My son left me alone last Christmas. After hearing his story, he called me." I read them all. I answered a few. I kept them all in a shoebox that I placed on top of the closet along with Margaret's porcelain. I also received calls, offers. They invited me to programs, to lectures, to tell the story at events. I refused almost everything. I said that my story was already where it should be, in people. What struck me the most, however, was a sentence, repeated by so many people in so many tones of voice that it seemed rehearsed by the universe. "You reminded us what family is." I never asked for that. I never wanted to teach anyone anything. I only lived the way I knew how, with work, honesty, and faith in those I loved. But seeing my house become a meeting point, a kind of beacon in the middle of this noisy modernity, was like feeling that even though I was old, I still had something to offer. And look, there's one thing that no one tells you about old age. We don't want much. He just doesn't want to be discarded. And that Christmas, in the place where solitude had once lived, a new kind of warmth entered. Not the one with the fireplace, that of being remembered. But if you think the story ended there, there is still one visit to go. And this one I swear I didn't expect. You won't believe who showed up at my door. At the end of that week, when things seemed to have settled down inside me, I decided to walk. The snow still covered the roofs, the gardens, and the sound of my footsteps was the only sound that broke the silence of the morning. Walking sometimes is my way of thinking and of being grateful. Each step is a conversation that I have with myself without haste, without an audience. I passed the corner where Cody fell on his bike for the first time. I remembered exactly how he cried, with that scrape on his knee and his face dirty with dirt. "Daddy, help me," he said that morning. I remember because that was the first time I felt the weight and honor of being a father. I looked at him, picked him up, cleaned the wound and said, "Whenever I fall, I'll be around." And I was. All these years, been. Further on, I walked to a vacant lot where, decades ago, I helped build a small house with my own hands. It was hard work, but it was honest. Those bricks didn't know my name, but they carried my sweat. I stood there looking at the emptiness of that land, as if seeing the past on the ground. I thought about everything I built, houses, slabs, roofs. But among all this, the biggest project I have ever touched was love. Loving Cody, even when he forgot me. Loving my wife even after she's gone. To love silence, when no one else wanted to hear what I had to say. I'm not going to lie to you, it still hurts. It hurts to see that the boy you taught to walk has become a man who tries to bring you down. But I also understood something. Love that comes and goes is a blessing. Love that only will. 1 hour is tiring. I don't hate my son. I swear not. I just learned that there are times when we need to let go of what hurts, to be able to hold on to what heals. I stayed there for a while longer, just watching the world go on. A dog ran past with a branch in its mouth. A couple pushed a baby stroller, laughing at something I didn't hear. And there, across the street, a father held the saddle of a bicycle while his son tried to balance for the first time. The scene caught me in a good way. The boy looked back, afraid of falling. The father smiled firmly, saying, "Go, I'm here." I smiled too, with sadness and with pride, because I knew right there that I had done the same, and that even if my son didn't look back to thank me, I've been there. And no one can take that away from me. Sometimes we plant on land that we don't give back, but the wind takes the seed to other corners, and when you least expect it, it blooms in the garden of someone who needed that shade. And that's why, that night, when I knocked on the door of the house and hung up my coat, I felt something different, a new silence. But I didn't know that someone at that very hour was coming towards me, and it didn't come alone. The next morning I woke up early as usual, made my black coffee, bitter as I always liked, and went to the garage. For days I had been sorting some good wood, which I kept from an old shed that they demolished near here. I cut it calmly, sanded the ends, shaped it patiently. Gradually I assembled small horses, pulling carts, stick figures with wheels on the bases. A simple thing of those who build more with the heart than with a tool. I decided to donate to the public school in the neighborhood. I didn't need my name to be written on them. It was enough for a child to smile when playing. No, many people think that old is not good for anything else. But that night, when my own son treated me like rubble, I discovered that I am still a foundation, the firm base that, even cracked by time, holds what matters upright. Today, I am not angry. What I had to say, I said. What I needed to feel, I felt. And what hurt. It doesn't hurt anymore. Cody walked away for good. He did not try to contact him again. Maybe one day I'll understand, maybe not. Bethany, from what I heard, returned to her mother's house. Peter remained firm in the social project, and from time to time, he stops by for a coffee and 2 laughs. The foundation is named after my wife. Elaine Project, Bricks of Hope. Sometimes the most beautiful things are born from what has been broken. And me, I'm here, living. With less weight and more silence. Not that silence of solitude, but that of peace. If I learned anything from all this, it was that love does not beg, and dignity is not negotiable. We can make mistakes, be disappointed, but if we keep what is right inside our chest, at some point life responds. Because time passes, faces change, money disappears, but character, this one stays, and it shines when everything else gets dark. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying here with me, listening to this story. Sometimes we think we're telling only ourselves. But then someone comes on the other side of the screen, listens, feels, recognizes himself. And this creates a bond that the world does not break. If this story moved you in any way, leave a like. For me, it will be like a tight hug at the end of a long day. And if you want to come back for more stories like this, subscribe here to the channel. It's going to be like leaving a separate chair for you at the next coffee shop. Incidentally, which city are you watching me from? Write it in the comments, because I want to feel this wheel grow, to know where each heart that hears me comes from. And if you really want to be close, activate the bell, okay? That way you don't lose when the coffee is brewed again. And look, don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.